Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It started on a Saturday night that felt colder than it should have been. We were sitting in her apartment, candles burning, TV humming in the background, and she said it like it was a joke. "You'll get touch when I feel like it." Her tone was playful, but the eyes weren't. It was that quiet cruelty disguised as confidence. The kind that tells you the person sitting across from you doesn't see you anymore, just what you give them. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her for a long second and said, "Then I'll disappear when I feel like it." She laughed, thinking I was bluffing. That's the thing about people who believe they have you. They stop listening when you speak. That night, she poured herself a drink and scrolled through her phone while I cleaned up the glasses. I remember the flicker of her iPhone screen reflecting in the wine. She was half present, texting someone I wasn't supposed to know about. The silence between us stretched so long it felt like a third person in the room. I slept on the couch, not because we argued, but because I was already gone. By Sunday morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Made coffee, put on music, talked about Target runs and meal prep. I just nodded, watching her move like we were strangers playing house. It hit me then, this wasn't distance. It was disconnection. She'd built walls, and I was still standing inside, pretending I could breathe. When she left for brunch with her friends, I stood in the doorway, watching her car pull away. Then I turned around, packed my essentials, laptop, keys, one jacket, and walked out. I didn't leave a note. Didn't take everything. Just enough to live. By the time she came back from Starbucks, my side of the closet was empty, and my Ford F-150 was gone from the driveway. She called that night, then texted, then called again. "Are you serious? Is this a game? You're being dramatic." I didn't answer, because it wasn't drama. It was freedom. For years, I'd stayed because I thought love meant endurance. Turns out, sometimes love looks like walking away before you forget who you are. That night, I drove until the city lights faded behind me, parked near the water, shut off my phone, and listened to nothing but the sound of waves hitting the rocks. She thought silence was punishment. She hadn't yet learned it was my peace. By the third day, she had gone from angry texts to emotional voicemails. Her tone switched between fury and fear, like she couldn't decide which one might pull me back. I didn't listen to all of them, just the first few. Enough to recognize the pattern. She wasn't missing me. She was missing control. I rented a small place a few towns over. Nothing fancy, just a quiet apartment above a laundromat with a view of the street and a flickering neon sign outside. The kind of place that doesn't expect you to stay long. It felt right. I bought a few basics at Walmart, made black coffee in the mornings, and started running again before sunrise. Each day felt like shedding another layer of the person I'd been with her. Meanwhile, she kept posting filtered pictures, half smiles, captions about growth and healing. It was strange watching someone perform recovery while still chasing the person who left. Every word she wrote was for me, even if she didn't admit it. I could feel it in the pauses between her posts. Daniel, a mutual friend, called me one evening. He said she'd been asking where I was, that she'd even reached out to his girlfriend pretending she needed advice. "Man, she's spiraling," he said. I told him I wasn't surprised. What I didn't tell him was that I wasn't coming back, not even to explain. I'd started documenting the messages, not for revenge, just for clarity. Reading her words months from now would remind me why leaving was necessary. I knew her patterns. She'd try to shift blame, rewrite history, make herself the victim. That's what happens when you take power away from someone who built their identity around having it. Late one night, I went for a drive. Same truck, same road, just a different version of me behind the wheel. I stopped at a diner, ordered black coffee, and watched the rain hit the parking lot lights. A woman at the counter laughed at something her friend said, and for a second, I realized how long it had been since I'd laughed like that. Not polite laughter, real laughter. My phone buzzed on the table. Another message from her. "You'll regret this." I looked at the screen until the notification faded, then turned the phone face down. She thought regret was about loss. She didn't know it could also mean realizing how long you'd settled for less. A week later, she showed up at my door. I didn't tell her where I'd moved, but somehow she found me. Maybe through Daniel. Maybe through the small details people let slip when they're not careful. I heard the knock before sunrise, soft, hesitant. When I opened the door, She was standing there, holding a coffee cup from Starbucks and wearing the same coat she'd had on the night I left. Her hair was damp from the rain, mascara smudged under her eyes. She didn't say much at first, just looked at me, waiting for me to invite her in. I didn't. The silence stretched, heavy, electric. Then she said, "You can't just disappear like that. That's not fair." Fair. That word hit me harder than I expected. Because fairness was never part of what we had. She set the rules, changed them, and laughed when I tried to keep up. Now she wanted fairness. I told her quietly that I didn't disappear. I just stopped being available for her timing. She blinked, confused, like she didn't understand what that meant. That's when I realized she'd never really seen me as a person. To her, I'd always been a function, something that existed to react, to validate, to wait. She started to cry. Not loud, just silent tears that made her mascara run down her cheeks. She said she'd been seeing a therapist, that she was trying to work on herself, that she'd realized she'd pushed too far, taken too much. She said she wanted to start over. But the way she said it didn't sound like growth. It sounded like survival, like she needed me to reset her stability again. I told her I was glad she was getting help. Then I said I wasn't part of her healing plan. The look on her face when I said that, it was like she'd been expecting every outcome but that one. She took a slow step back, nodded once, and whispered, "You really don't care anymore." I didn't answer. She left, walking down the wet street, fading into the fog. I stood there for a while, listening to the distant hum of cars. My phone buzzed again later that night, a number I didn't recognize, but the message was clear: she's struggling. Maybe talk to her. Even her therapist was reaching out now. I didn't respond. Because you can't fix someone who only wants you when they've broken themselves. The message from her therapist came 2 more times that week, short, polite, professional. "She's been having a difficult time. It might help her to hear from you." I didn't reply. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't available either. That distinction mattered to me. For years, my presence had been a given, something she could take, test, or twist whenever she needed to feel in control. Now that I'd stepped away, even professionals were trying to pull me back into her orbit. Silence, I realized, makes people uncomfortable when they can't control it. I started spending more time alone. My days became quiet, clean. I'd hit the gym before work, stop at the same diner for breakfast, and sit in the corner booth with black coffee and eggs. It wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. The kind of peace that doesn't need an audience. Then, one morning, I saw her again. Not in person, online. A new post. The photo looked staged. Her smiling at a park, holding a coffee, pretending to laugh. The caption read, "Healing isn't linear." I almost scrolled past it, but then I noticed something strange. She'd tagged the therapist in the post. It was subtle, but it screamed for attention. It wasn't about recovery. It was about being seen as someone worth saving. Daniel called that night. He said she'd been telling people I ghosted her out of nowhere, that she was painting herself as the one abandoned. I didn't correct him. I didn't correct anyone. Let them believe what they wanted. Truth doesn't need defenders, it just waits. That same evening, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, just my name in handwriting I knew too well. Inside was a letter, long, emotional, full of apologies that didn't sound like regret, only desperation. The last line said, "You don't have to come back, but please don't forget I exist." I folded the paper once, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not as a keepsake, as a reminder. Some people don't miss you. They miss access to you. The next morning, I took my coffee and drove down to the shore. Watched the sun rise slow over the water. The air was cold, sharp, but it felt alive. Her therapist might not reach me. Her apologies might not reach me. But for the first time, I'd finally reached myself. A few weeks passed. Her messages stopped. The therapist stopped. Even Daniel stopped asking about her. It was like the noise around my name finally went quiet. That's when I realized what silence really does. It doesn't punish people. It exposes what they were without you. One night, I ran into Jenna, one of her friends. We crossed paths at Target, both reaching for the same carton of milk. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Then, almost nervously, she said, "She's not doing well." I didn't ask. I just nodded, grabbed my things, and walked away. But as I drove home, her words echoed. Not because I cared the way I used to, but because it confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't built to sit in silence. She thrived on reaction, on control, on knowing she could pull emotion out of me like flipping a switch. Now that the switch was gone, she didn't know who she was anymore. Later that night, I checked her social media again. It wasn't out of weakness, it was curiosity. The account was still up, but it looked empty. The old photos were deleted. Only one remained. A blurry picture of the ocean. No caption, no tags, just water stretching into nothing. For the first time, I felt something close to empathy, because I understood what that picture meant. That emptiness wasn't aesthetic, it was real. She had built a life out of noise, and when the noise stopped, the silence was unbearable. The next morning, I woke early and went for a drive. The highway was empty, the air still heavy with mist. I thought about the version of me who used to stay, who thought that if I loved her harder, she'd finally see me. That version was gone. I'd buried him somewhere between heartbreak and clarity. When I stopped for gas, I saw a message pop up on my phone. Unknown number. Just 3 words. I finally understand. I didn't know if it was her, the therapist, or someone else trying to bridge the gap. It didn't matter. I deleted it without opening. Because understanding doesn't erase the damage. It just arrives too late to matter. That night, I sat outside, watching the moonlight cut across the parking lot. The world was quiet. My phone stayed dark. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to disappear. Because I already had, from her world, not my own. By the time spring came, it was like she'd vanished completely. No more traces online, no whispers from mutual friends, not even a text. At first, I thought it was strange. For someone who lived off attention, disappearing didn't fit her. But then I realized it wasn't strategy. It was collapse. When the spotlight dies, even the performer has to face the dark. I'd settled into something close to normal by then. Early mornings, work, gym, coffee from the same small place every day. The barista knew my order by heart. I wasn't searching for peace anymore. I was living in it. The kind that doesn't demand silence, but grows from it. One evening, as I was walking back to my truck, I saw Daniel standing by the curb. He looked uneasy, like he'd rehearsed something and wasn't sure how to say it. He said he'd run into her at a grocery store. She looked thin, tired, nothing like the version she used to project. He said she mentioned therapy again, that she was trying to make sense of what she'd done and what she'd lost. I asked him if she seemed better. He hesitated, then said, "She looked like someone who finally realizes the damage wasn't done to her, it was done by her." That line stuck with me. That night, I sat in the truck for a long time before heading inside. The quiet was heavy but calm. I didn't feel vindicated, just reflective. There was no victory in her pain, only distance. Distance I'd earned through restraint. A few days later, I got an envelope in the mail. My name, handwritten again. Inside, another letter. This one shorter. The writing uneven. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know I see it now. Every time you went silent, I thought you were being cold. I didn't understand you were saving what was left of yourself." I read it twice, then folded it and set it on the table. I didn't feel the urge to respond. There was nothing left to say. That evening, I drove down to the coast. Same place I'd gone the night I left. The air smelled of salt and rain. I watched the tide roll in, slow and relentless. For years, I tried to fix someone who didn't want to be healed. Now she was trying to fix herself, and I wasn't part of it. And that was the truest kind of closure there is. A month passed before I heard her name again. It came from Amanda, another mutual friend who still floated between circles. She ran into me outside a coffee shop, the kind of accidental encounter that feels scripted. She asked if I'd heard about everything, and when I said no, her expression shifted. She told me the therapist had dropped her as a client. Apparently, it had something to do with boundaries, or maybe the lack of them. She said my ex had started crossing lines, showing up late, calling outside sessions, needing constant reassurance. Eventually, even the therapist realized she wasn't seeking help. She was seeking someone to fill the silence I left behind. I didn't react. I just sipped my coffee, watching people pass by. Amanda kept talking, maybe trying to get some reaction out of me, but I stayed quiet. Because what she didn't understand, what none of them did, was that silence wasn't revenge. It was protection. After she left, I sat in my car and thought about it. Not with anger, just distance. There's something surreal about hearing how someone unravels after you stop holding them up. For years, I thought she'd never fall, that she'd always land on her feet, even if it was over me. But some people only balance because you're the ground beneath them. Later that night, I got home and saw her number flash on my phone again. I hadn't seen it in months. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then, before it stopped ringing, I picked up. Not to talk, just to listen. Her voice was slower now, softer. She said she wasn't calling to ask for anything. She just wanted to say she finally understood what I meant the night I said I'd disappear. She said she'd thought I was bluffing, but now she saw what I meant. That disappearing isn't running. It's reclaiming. There was a pause after that, the kind that stretches longer than it should. I could hear her breathing, waiting for me to say something. But there was nothing left to add. After a moment, I hung up. Not abruptly, not cruelly, just with finality. The next morning, the phone was silent again. No missed calls, no messages. For the first time since I'd known her, the silence didn't feel like an echo. It felt like closure wearing calm. The call stayed in my head for days. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. There was no control left in her voice. No edge, no manipulation. Just exhaustion. The kind that comes when someone finally runs out of versions of themselves to perform. I started thinking about how we used to be. The small routines, the inside jokes that slowly turned into habits of avoidance. I remembered the way she used to withhold affection just to see how far she could push before I broke. Every time I stayed. Until I didn't. That was the part she never expected, that I could be quiet and still mean it. A few weeks later, I got another envelope. Same handwriting, no return address. Inside was a photo, one of us from 2 years ago, sitting by the water, laughing at something neither of us remembered. On the back, she'd written, "I kept trying to make you chase me, not realizing you were learning how to walk away." I didn't feel anger or nostalgia, just an odd kind of peace. Because that sentence told me everything. She finally understood the difference between power and love. Power fades when it's ignored. Love, the real kind, doesn't demand proof. That night, I met Daniel for dinner at a small Applebee's off the highway. He asked if I'd ever think about talking to her again, maybe for closure. I told him the truth. That closure doesn't come from conversation. It comes from distance, from silence that doesn't ache anymore. He nodded like he understood, but I could tell he didn't. Most people don't until they've lived it. When I got home, I poured a drink, opened the window, and listened to the quiet city hum below. Somewhere out there, she was probably doing the same. Sitting alone, tracing the edges of what used to be control, realizing how heavy it feels when you finally have to hold yourself up. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her pain. I just didn't wish her anything anymore. That's the cleanest kind of freedom, when someone's name passes through your mind and leaves no storm behind. She once told me I'd never really disappear, that I'd always come back. But silence, when you learn how to live inside it, doesn't return. It expands until you can't be found. Summer came fast that year, the kind of heat that makes everything feel slower. I'd gotten used to the quiet. My routines had solidified into something steady. Gym at dawn, coffee at the same small diner, work, home, peace. Every once in a while, I'd catch myself thinking about her, but the thoughts didn't sting anymore. They just passed through, like background noise you stop noticing. Then one morning, I got a message from an unknown number. Just a picture, her sitting by the ocean, same place we used to go, no caption. I stared at it for a few seconds before deleting it. I didn't need to interpret it. Some people send photos when they can't find words strong enough to carry regret. Later that week, Daniel told me she'd moved out of state. New city, new job, new version of herself. He said she'd been quiet lately, no social media, no drama. Just gone. I told him that was good. That maybe she was finally learning how to live without needing to be seen. He nodded, but there was a question in his eyes, the same one everyone eventually asks. Did I still care? The truth was complicated. I cared the way you care about a storm that once wrecked your house. Not with longing, but with respect for the damage. You never forget the noise, but you stop fearing the rain. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep. I went for a drive, windows down, air warm and heavy. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Somewhere between the turns, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't running from her anymore. I was running toward myself. When I got home, I opened the drawer where I'd kept her letters. There were only 2, folded neatly, untouched for months. I read the last one again, the one about learning to let go, about not asking for forgiveness. For the first time, I believed her. I burned the letter in the sink, watched the paper curl and darken until it was nothing but ash. The smoke rose and disappeared through the open window, swallowed by the night. That was the last trace of her in my life. No bitterness, no longing, just smoke and silence. And in that silence, I finally heard something I hadn't in years. My own peace, steady, unshaken, and completely mine. It's strange how endings never announce themselves. They don't arrive with closure or grand gestures. They just fade, quietly, until one day you realize there's nothing left to hold. That's how it was with her. No dramatic final call, no confrontation, just the quiet truth that we were done. Months passed. Life became smaller but clearer. I started rebuilding in quiet ways, learning to cook, running again, reading before bed instead of staring at my phone waiting for messages that no longer came. There was a peace in the ordinary that I'd never known before, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. One afternoon, while picking up groceries at Walmart, I saw a woman who looked like her from behind. Same hair color, same walk. For a second, my body froze out of habit. But when she turned, it wasn't her. I exhaled slowly, realizing how much power those memories used to have. Not anymore. The ghosts had lost their shape. A week later, Daniel called to say she'd reached out to him. Not to talk about me, just to say she was doing better. He sounded relieved, like that news meant something. I told him I was glad. And I meant it. Because when you've made peace with the past, you don't need to see anyone fail. You just want the noise to stop. That night, I sat on the balcony with a drink, watching the sun sink over the rooftops. The world around me buzzed softly, distant traffic, laughter from a nearby apartment, the hum of life continuing. I thought about everything that had happened, every word we'd said, every silence we'd shared. It used to feel like her voice filled the world. Now it was just another echo, swallowed by time. I picked up my phone, opened her last message, the one that simply said, "I understand now." I didn't delete it. I didn't need to. It no longer carried weight. It was just a sentence, one small artifact from a story that had already ended. As the sky darkened, I caught my reflection in the window. Calm, detached, alive. That was the man I'd become, not bitter, not broken, just free. She once said I'd never really disappear. But I did. Not into darkness. Not out of anger. I disappeared into peace. And that's the one place she'll never be able to find me. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.